woman. She basically climbed the highest porticos of power in Britain, and that was no mean feat.
Well, but you have to understand how it was done. There were no women around her. She was actually elected by her own party to serve as a new broom that would bring about reforms that would be very unpopular. Then they figured they could unload her and start again. When they actually came to unload her, it was done in the most callous way. And now Tony Blair, who's her most famous disciple, is a multimillionaire, probably a billionaire. Margaret Thatcher didn't get any seats on any lucrative boards. None of the easy money came her way. She actually did lecture tours, which is outrageous that someone of her political eminence should be reduced to that. Believe me, the British establishment got their revenge on Margaret Thatcher.
And we have one more question down the front. You have your hand up there.
Margaret Thatcher came from a relatively elite background, and do you think it would have been different if she was...
Shopkeeper's daughter in Grantham.
No, she didn't. That's wrong.
That's awkward.
Sorry.
That's OK. Yeah, we will move along now. We'll go to other questions. We've got a question on a completely different subject from Lucy Welsh.
To the panel, but in particular Brooke Magnanti, how are we to feel now about women who work as prostitutes, strippers and even lingerie waitresses? I feel that people are of course entitled to their own decisions, and if they're comfortable enough in their own skin to work in those areas, then more power to them. But there are many people who disagree with that and say that these women can't possibly be feminists. What do you say to that?
Well, certainly a lot of people said to me specifically I could not be a feminist, which came as a shock to me, having been raised to call myself a feminist and by a feminist mother. And I did feel like I had to let the label go, but it didn't really change what I thought or how I do. One thing that I think is very important for us to recognize when we discuss sex work and the issues around sex work, people feel very uncomfortable because of the sex. But the real issues are the work. It's really an issue to do with whether the workers can organize, whether they can improve their own conditions, whether migrant workers who may be coming in to do sex work have access to the same kind of resources that people who are already living here have access to, and to really improving things across the board. It really worries me to see in Europe, and I hear also spreading down here, this sort of trend of thinking that we can just end demand and everything will be solved overnight. And really, we have to acknowledge that sex work is a very broad umbrella. There are people like me who worked in it. There are people who have very much more chaotic lives who work in it.
We should probably explain that you no longer do, and I think you did work as a sex worker for 1 year. Was it 2003?
18 months.
18 months.
So 2003 to 2004. And really, you know, that just goes back to the diversity of the work. For some people, it's a stopgap. For some people, it's a career. For some people, you know, it can be all kinds of things. And
to go back to the question, how is feminism compatible with prostitution?
With sex work, Tony.
OK.
Feminism is compatible with sex work in the sense that women should have the ability and the right to self-determination, even if they make decisions that you think are wrong, even if they make decisions that make you uncomfortable, that we have a responsibility, even to people who might be taking drugs or might be having chaotic lives in other ways, to have the compassion to reach out and support them and not alienate them from the social structures of everyday life that the rest of us take for granted.
Germaine Greer.
Well, one of the major tenets of modern feminism is the protest against the commoditization of people. Now, if you're selling sex services with a clearly understood bargain between two people, which will be honoured by both sides, in which both sides are fully cognizant of what's going on and you're not connected to organised crime or any of the other horrors that beset prostitution, I don't see that it's any different from having to smile for a living. You know, you can't be a waitress and be grumpy, even though it's work that makes you incredibly grumpy. You've still got to smile and make people think that it's all up and it's all pee-pee-poo and it's all fun. even when it's absolutely not fun at all. Most of us have to sell ourselves in some way or another. In some ways, just selling sex is to sell less of yourself than when you become a company person, when you become identified with your employer, when your employer dictates your very mental processes. We are all involved in selling things that shouldn't be sold at all. It's called capitalism. It's the system.
Okay.
And Eve was the first person to work in it.
But just quickly, so from your point of view, feminism and sex work completely compatible?
Well, I'm not sure that feminism's completely compatible with anything that exists as of now. You don't have to accept the system as it is. But we have prostitutes collectives, and they're very outspoken. They're sometimes quite...
Sex workers?
Aggressive.
Thank you, Tony.
They call themselves prostitutes, actually. They're quite proud of the term.
But it's about reclaiming that in so many ways, something that's been used as an epithet against a marginalised group. That I could call myself really all kinds of horrible things, but if any of you did, I'd leap across the table to eviscerate you.
Fine, but I could say, for example...
Let's hope that doesn't happen this evening.
No, but I could say, for example, that if I agree to write an editorial for a newspaper that I despise, I have prostituted myself, and writers do it every day.
Absolutely.
Janet, what are your thoughts on this?
I'd like to say for once I don't have an opinion, but no, let me venture one. I think economists would say that the surprise is not that, that so many women take up prostitution, it's that so many women don't, because when you think about how highly paid they are, the flexible hours, for many women, no, I don't say that flippantly, for many women who don't have the sort of educational opportunities that we might have here or don't have the job opportunities that come from a good education, it's pretty good work when you think about the money. I mean, I've worked as a lawyer. I can tell you, I'm sure, Brooke, your hourly rate was much better than mine. and you worked flexible hours. I was, working 70 hours a week.
My lawyer is through the roof. I often say to him, Robert, you need to change jobs so I can afford you.
But, and I agree that it is compatible with feminism, but only when you are able to make that choice rationally. If you're affected by drugs, if you have what you call a chaotic life, I mean, it's very often the case that prostitutes have drug addictions, alcohol addictions, some other form of addiction.
So
Not
do people
always.
who work in kitchens. I mean, this is the thing, and really we have to recognise that while to a certain extent, because there are people in our society whose choices are restricted, and just to go very briefly into my own experience, I was a migrant student to the UK. I could not work more than 15 hours a week. I was 5,000 miles away from home. No money, no access to money, and no access to any kind of social services. And when you think about it that way, you think, right, well, what's left?
It's very rational. No, I'm going
to interrupt you because we've got another question on this subject from Decima Raxel.
Brooke, you said that working as a sex worker was as much a spiritual experience for you as a biological one. Did this also apply to your male partners, do you think?
To the people who were my clients?
Yes, to your clients.
I have no idea. I mean, work becomes so many things, and really I agree on a very base level with Germaine in terms of it exists within the system of capitalism, and so we have to analyse it and think about it that way. For me, it was very much an eye-opener about a certain way of living. I was very much a country mouse living in the city for the first time. London was the biggest place that I've ever lived. I was born in a village of 300 people. So it was as much discovering things about myself through the work that I was doing. Could I have done that working behind a bar? I probably could have done. Was I eligible to work behind a bar? I wasn't.
What's the spiritual element, though, if you can just explain that part of the question? Because I think a lot of people will be puzzled to hear that. And I must say, weren't there times when you came across a client and thought, when you looked at them, you thought, well, I just can't do this?
No, actually there weren't, because part of the job is finding something inside of each person to connect with. It isn't just putting the plate down on the table, enjoy your meal, here it is, let's go. It is you know, you are contributing to somebody else's physical experience in some way. And there are a lot of sex workers, for example, that work with disabled clients, who work with clients who have a lot of social awkwardness, who don't find it easy to have sexual relationships with other people. I mean, obviously, this is something very much covered in the recent Helen Hunt film. And there
Do you see
is-
yourself in the same light as providing some sort of social
bit
service
like-
to damaged men or
I wouldn't go
needy,
so far as
needy
to
men, let's say?
I would say to categorize them as damaged or needy is a very broad and very unfair brushstroke. But I
think
would
we could
say
needy, that would certainly apply.
I'm not going to comment on that one, but I would say that in a lot of ways, and a lot of sex workers have said similar things, it almost feels like nursing. You know, there is a job you are doing, and then there's also a level of connection and communication that you're having with a person that you're just thrown together with because of the circumstances of the work that you do.
Deborah, what are your thoughts listening to this? And reflecting on the earlier question, which was really about whether it's compatible, whether sex work is compatible with feminism.
I'll get to that in a moment. The young lady who didn't get to finish her question, I agree. Margaret Thatcher, by comparison, did have a privileged life.
She was incredibly educated.
It would have been quite a different question had she been black or homosexual in that age. So, yes, she did leave privilege of a sort, even a shopkeeper's daughter. I think it is a woman's right to choose. I think there's a really big issue that I always think about in the sex industry, and that is demand and supply. All of the focus tends to be on the sex worker, mostly, well, many women. Of course, there are men who also work in the sex worker industry.